Picture a 21-year-old university student in Vancouver, standing in her dorm room kitchen surrounded by failed candy experiments. Tara Bosch stares at yet another batch of gummy bears that just won't work. Too rubbery, too sweet, or just plain inedible. Her University of British Columbia professors would say she's wasting her time. Her parents worry she's throwing away her education. And now she faces the biggest decision of her young life. Stay in school or drop everything to pursue this crazy idea of creating healthy candy. In her heart, she's struggling between safety and possibility. Everything logical says stay in school, but something deeper whispers, take the leap. Maybe you know that feeling. Perhaps it's not a candy experiment, but a dream that seems impossible, a decision that terrifies you, or a step that everyone around you says is a crazy idea. That moment when moving forward feels like jumping off of a cliff. But what if there's more to life than playing it safe? I mean, what if the very obstacle making you hesitate could become the bridge to your next breakthrough? Let's explore that together right now on More to Life. I've had moments of decision and transition in my life that felt overwhelming in the moment, too big for me to handle. Almost like staring at a raging river and knowing I have to make it to the other side, but not knowing how I was going to make it over there. Many Canadians, and you might be one of them, carry those same burdens, wrestling with major life transitions and not knowing how they will make it. From young professionals questioning their career paths, business owners contemplating strategic partnerships, parents making decisions for their families, and students like Tara wondering if they should change direction. What makes these transitions particularly challenging is that they often require leaving something familiar or something unknown. Our brains are wired to prefer the certainty of what we know, even if it's not ideal, over the uncertainty of what we don't. This is where an old story becomes surprisingly relevant to our modern dilemma. Picture a massive crowd, over 2 million people, standing at the edge of an uncrossable river. Behind them lies 40 years of the familiar. Before them stretches the promise of something better. But between them and that promise runs a barrier that seems impossible to overcome. The waters they faced weren't just a gentle stream to step over. During this particular season, the flooding made the river nearly a mile wide in many places. This wasn't just any ordinary obstacle, it was a legitimate barrier between them and their future. This wasn't just a physical crossing either. It was a psychological and spiritual threshold. Their entire identity was about to shift from wanderers to possessors, from nomads to settlers, from people of the past to people of promise. What's fascinating about this story is how relevant it feels to our modern transitions. Just like that ancient community, we often find ourselves between where we've been and where we're going, facing obstacles that seem impossible to cross. And so whether you're contemplating leaving a secure job or to start a business like Tara Bosch did with Smart Sweets, or making any other major life transition, the principles we discover in this story offer timeless wisdom for moving forward. Because here's the truth, right? Your moment at the water's edge isn't just about the obstacle in front of you. It's about who you become in the process of crossing it. Today we'll discover how God turned what seemed like an uncrossable river at flood stage into a pathway of possibility, and what that means for the rivers you're facing in your own life as well. Before we unpack the principles from this story, let's understand exactly what was happening at this moment in history. The year is approximately 1400 BC. The people of Israel have spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness after their exodus from slavery in Egypt. The older generation that witnessed the plague, saw the Red Sea part, and ate manna from heaven had all passed away except for Joshua and Caleb. This new generation standing at the edge of the Jordan River had only heard the amazing miracle stories of God's deliverance. They were children of the wilderness, born into wandering. And now, under their new leader, Joshua, they face their first major obstacle. The Jordan River during harvest season was no small challenge. While normally 100 feet wide in most places, during spring harvest, the melting snows from Mount Hermon in the background would cause the river to swell to nearly a mile wide. Listen, the waters were deep, they were swift, they were dangerous. As the first part of Joshua chapter 3 verse 15 tells us, it was the harvest season and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. This was an impossible situation for them. However, everyone knew it had to be crossed in order to inherit the land God had promised them. Now, with this context in mind, let's look at the first truth from this story that applies to us today. And that is that preparation precedes progress. The first thing we notice is that Joshua, Israel's new leader after Moses died, doesn't immediately lead the people across. Instead, we read in Joshua chapter 3, verse 5, "Then Joshua told the people, 'Purify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do great wonders among you.'" Now, this 3-day preparation period might seem like a delay, but it was actually essential to their progress. As theologian Walter Brueggemann notes, the space between promise and fulfillment is not empty time, but rather filled with the hard work of getting ready. This wasn't just about physical preparation. This was about spiritual and psychological readiness. During these 3 days, several crucial things happened. The people were given clear instructions. They were told to watch for the Ark of the Covenant before they made a move. They were asked to consecrate themselves, a time to think about what lay ahead. And for Israel, this preparation meant shifting their mindset from wanderers to possessors, from refugees to conquerors. And this preparation time isn't just about that external readiness. It's about those internal shifts that need to happen before moving forward. For them, it meant shifting from wilderness mindset to an owner mindset. In our own lives, these mental shifts are just as crucial as practical preparation. For example, a business owner might need to stop seeing themselves as just getting by and start seeing themselves as an industry leader. A parent returning to school might need to shift from seeing themselves as too old to learn to seeing themselves as experienced and capable. Someone in recovery might need to move from seeing themselves as a victim of their past to seeing themselves as an overcomer of their circumstances. These kind of mental shifts don't happen instantly. They require intentional work. Often during those preparation periods that feel like delays, but are actually essential to our progress. The second truth we can learn is that miracles often happen mid-step. The priest carrying the ark had to step into the flood before anything happened. Joshua chapter 3 verse 13 says, "The priests will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall. Notice the sequence. Step first, then the miracle will happen. Not miracle first and then step forward. Biblical scholar N.T. Wright observes, faith is not about having enough belief to make things happen. It's about having enough trust to take the next step. Those priests had to get their feet wet before they saw any evidence that this would work. Think about this in practical terms. I mean, it means no business plan is perfect before launch. No relationship is guaranteed before commitment. No calling is crystal clear before we step out. No change is certain before we begin. The miracle wasn't in the planning, or in the preparation, or even in the promise. It was in the stepping. When I think about this truth, I think about what steps I may be avoiding. That first step into rushing water rarely feels safe or logical. For some, the step might be initiating a difficult conversation with a family member where pride has kept you from reaching out. For others, it might be submitting that business proposal you've revised at least 20 times. Perhaps it's finally enrolling in that degree program you've dreamed about, even though you're not sure how you'll manage the time or resources. Medical professionals afraid of starting their own practice. Artists afraid to share their work publicly or online. Leaders afraid to implement necessary but maybe unpopular changes. All face their own version of flood stage waters. The truth remains, we won't experience the parting until we take the step. Those priests didn't see the water recede until they got their feet wet. Similarly, we may not experience breakthrough until we move beyond our comfort zone into the uncomfortable space of trust and faith. But perhaps you're wondering, well, what if I step out and nothing happens? What if I get my feet wet and the waters don't part? It's a valid question, one that those priests must have considered as they approached the Jordan's edge. The answer lies in understanding that even if things don't unfold exactly as we envision, steps forward are never wasted. Sometimes the miracle looks different than we expected. Those who step out might not see the waters part, but they might discover strength they never knew they had, find support they didn't expect, or even uncover opportunities they could have never seen from the shoreline. Think of it this way, remaining on the banks guarantees the waters won't part. At least those who step out, even if they get wet, know they had the courage to at least try. They learned something about themselves, maybe even about God, and about what they're capable of. Often, it's in those very steps of uncertainty that we develop character, resilience, and faith needed for the larger victories ahead. And finally, lesson number 3. Remember your crossings. After the crossing, Joshua commands something significant. He has 12 men, one from each tribe, take stones from the middle of the river to build a memorial. We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them. They remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across. These stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever. Author Max Lucado puts it powerfully, monuments of remembrance are crucial. God knows we are a forgetful people living in a forgetting world. The memorial served 3 purposes: a reminder of God's faithfulness, a teaching tool for future generations, and a public testimony of what God had done. But here's what's fascinating. Okay, these stones came from the middle of the river. They had to reach down into the very place of impossibility to create the memorial. Sometimes our most powerful testimonies come from the hardest parts of our journey. The same generation that watched their parents die in the wilderness because of fear and unbelief now had to face their own river. They could have said, well, no, this is impossible. They could have said, oh, let's just go back. They could have even said, let's wait for better conditions. Instead, they moved forward. And when they crossed the Jordan, they weren't just leaving their wilderness behind. They were leaving behind their wilderness mentality. They weren't just entering new territory. They were becoming new people. The same is true for us. Your Jordan moment isn't just about getting to the other side of your challenge. It's about who you become in the process. Every step of preparation, every act of faith and obedience, every stone of remembrance shapes not just your future, but your identity. What if your impossible river isn't an obstacle, but an opportunity? What if, like those priests stepping into the flood, your next step of faith could trigger your next miracle? What if, like those 12 stones, your story of crossing could become someone else's source of courage? Remember, the same God who parted the Jordan still specializes in making a way where there seems to be no way. This story teaches us that moving forward isn't about having all the answers. It's about simply having enough faith to take the next step. It's not about perfect conditions. It's about perfect trust. It's not about what we can do. It's about what God can do through us. Your river might look very different from the Jordan. Perhaps you're facing a career transition that seems impossible to navigate. Maybe it's a broken relationship that needs restoration, or a dream that feels way too big to pursue. For some of you, it might be a change that just seems a little too risky to attempt. Yet the principles we discover at the Jordan's edge remain constant. God meets us in our preparation, shows up in our steps of faith, and asks us to remember His faithfulness. What's particularly beautiful about this moment at the Jordan is how it affected generations after it. The crossing wasn't just for those who experienced it firsthand. Every time an Israelite child would pass those memorial stones and asked about their significance, the story would come alive again. The testimony of God's faithfulness would echo throughout time, encouraging new generations to face their own impossible rivers. When the priests stood in the middle of that riverbed, they weren't just holding space for their contemporaries to cross. They were creating a story that would inspire courage for thousands of years to come. The Jordan River crossing wasn't just a historical event. It was a pattern for how God works in every generation. He still parts rivers. He still makes ways through impossible situations. He still turns obstacles into opportunities. The only question is, are you willing to get your feet wet?
If you haven't already partnered with us as an agent of hope, I want to share with you how you can do so. Pray that these programs will speak to the hearts of people all across Canada. Also, any time that you have to spare in order to volunteer with one of our projects will be greatly appreciated. Lastly, you can make a one-time or a recurring donation. Thank you once again for joining us on this exciting journey of sharing hope across Canada and beyond.
Looking at this story of crossing the Jordan, here are 3 reflective questions to help you move forward in your own life. Number 1, what is your Jordan? Before we can move forward, we need to name what's holding us back. Take time to identify your flood stage river. Think deeply about where you currently stand. What transition are you avoiding? What change have you been contemplating but haven't acted on? What new territory maybe is God inviting you to enter? Remember, your Jordan isn't just the obstacle itself, it's often what that obstacle represents. For the Israelites, the Jordan wasn't just about crossing a river, it was about leaving their familiar wilderness for unknown territory. Number 2, what's your preparation? Just as Israel had 3 days to prepare, consider what preparation you need before taking your step. This isn't just about practical readiness, it's about spiritual and emotional preparation. A father I know spent 6 months preparing to have a conversation with his estranged son. His preparation wasn't just rehearsing what to say, it involved working with a counselor to process first his own hurt, understanding more about forgiveness, and learning how to communicate. And finally, number 3, what's your memorial? The Israelites didn't just cross the Jordan, they created a way to remember the crossing. How will you mark your progress? How will you document your journey? Some people journal their progress, others keep significant objects that represent their crossing, while others share their story to encourage those facing similar challenges. Consider how your story might become someone else's courage. And so this week, I encourage you to take time alone to honestly identify your Jordan River. Name it specifically. Write it down if you need to. Share it with one trusted person who can hold you accountable. Begin your preparation. This might involve research, skill development, or spiritual disciplines. Remember, like the Israelites, sometimes we need to consecrate ourselves before we see God's miraculous intervention. Most importantly, remember that you're not crossing alone. Just as the priests carried the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence, into the Jordan, God's presence goes with you into your transition, whatever that is. You might not see the waters part until you take that first step, but you can trust the one who controls the waters. I want to invite you to connect with me on this journey. Follow More to Life on social media where we can continue this conversation. Whether you're just identifying your Jordan or you're already mid-crossing, I'm here to support and encourage you.
Have you ever asked these questions? Why am I here? Is there a God? Why is there so much evil and suffering? And why are there so many different religions, and which one is true? Is the Bible fact or fiction? Who is Jesus of Nazareth? Was he truly God, as Christians say he is? And why did Jesus come to earth to die? And how does his death offer us salvation? What happens when I die? Is there really a heaven or hell? These questions and others we answer on our online Bible study platform at hopestudy.ca. There, you will find answers to these and other life-changing questions. If you have any questions, please email us at hopestudy@hopetv.ca.
Remember that 21-year-old in her UBC dorm room surrounded by failed candy experiments? Well, when Tara Bosch stood at her Jordan River with the withdrawal form from university in her hand, she couldn't see how the story would end. She just knew she had to take the next step, even when everyone around her questioned her decision. Like those priests stepping into the floodwaters, she had to move forward before she could see the way through. For Tara, each step required courage. Starting by selling her candy creations door to door to local retailers, working through countless failed recipes, learning about food science and manufacturing, building relationships with suppliers. Each step was its own small crossing, its own act of faith. Just 5 years after that moment in her dorm room, at the age of 26 years old, Tara sold Smart Sweets for $360 million. But here's what's fascinating. The sale wasn't her biggest victory. Her real triumph was in every small step of faith. Every moment she chose to move forward when she could have turned back. Her success wasn't just in the outcome, it was in who she became in the process. And your story might look very different from Tara's. Perhaps your Jordan River isn't about building a business, but rebuilding a relationship. Maybe it's not about creating a new product, but creating a new life. Your crossing might not lead to financial success, but it could lead to something even more valuable: personal transformation, spiritual growth, or even a legacy that impacts generations of people. Think about where you're standing right now. Maybe you're still at the water's edge, calculating the risks, wondering, should I step in? Maybe you're like those priests, your feet already wet, waiting for the waters to part. Or perhaps you're halfway across, attempting to turn back because the other shore still seems so far away. Remember what we learned from the Jordan River crossing. Preparation isn't wasted time, it's essential time. Those 3 days of waiting weren't about delay, they were about getting ready for what God was about to do. The miracle happened mid-step. The waters didn't part until wet feet hit the river. Your breakthrough might be waiting for your next step of faith. Your crossing isn't just about you. Those stones of remembrance weren't just for the people of Israel who crossed over. They were for the generations that came after them. And your act of faith today could become someone else's courage tomorrow. Today's stories of crossing, like Tara's journey from dorm room experimenting to becoming a successful business, reminds us that God is still in the business of parting waters. He still makes ways through impossible situations. He still turns obstacles into opportunities. He still transforms ordinary people into living testimonies. And so as we close today, let me ask you, what if your flood stage river isn't an obstacle, but it could be an opportunity? What if your impossible situation isn't a barrier, but a backdrop for God's power? What if, like Tara Bosch, like those priests stepping into the Jordan, your next step of faith could trigger your next miracle? Because here's the truth. There is more to life than standing on the banks of what could have been. There's more to your story than the chapter you're in right now. And sometimes the very waters that look most impossible to cross become the testimony that impacts generations to come. In Jesus, there is more to life than staying stuck on the water's edge. There's more to life than letting fear write your story. There's more to life than watching others enter their promised land while you stay in familiar territory. There's more to life than remembering what God did in the past. He wants to do it again through you, starting with your next step of faith.